Before we jump into today's episode, I do have to give a little disclaimer. We had some tech issues on this episode. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much to my special guest. I'm not going to reveal who she is yet because she was an absolute trooper. This was a podcast of two halves, and you will see why if you are watching this video. So do check it out. I hope you enjoy it. It was a fabulous conversation. Please do stay tuned. Let's jump into today's show. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I am your host, Donna Eade, and today on the show, we have a special guest. Her name is Ruth Cooper Dickson, and she is a well-being entrepreneur, a positive psychology practitioner, and a trauma-informed accredited coach. So we have been through the mill the last 2 years, and we are now finding ourselves in what could be considered our new normal. A new normal that looks very different to our old one. So today we are going to dive into some of that and get her perspective on it. So let's jump into today's show. Welcome to the podcast, Ruth. I am so excited to have you here. I am always up for learning something new from someone new. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
I would love it if we could start off with you explaining a little bit about what it is that you do and how you came to be doing what you're doing.
Well, how long have we got? That's a podcast in itself. So I'm, as people might have seen on your show notes, I'm a positive psychology practitioner, and I own several businesses, wellbeing businesses. So I guess I class myself as a wellbeing entrepreneur. I have my main global mental health and wellbeing consultancy called Champs, and then which is coming up for 7 years old in October. So that's like my big girl. In 2019, I set up a social enterprise, which is called Champs for Change, which is supporting women who've gone through a form of abuse through thrivership coaching. And that was really my wanting to give back to society. And I've also got a private coaching practice as well. So again, as per my notes and your intro, I'm a trauma-informed accredited coach. So I have an MSc in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology. But I only really came into this space, well, it was 7 years ago in the mental health space and wellbeing space, because I'd gone through my own lived experience of mental ill health. So before that, I'd had a career of 18, 19 years or so in various industries. So aerospace, investment banking, wealth management, and more broader recruitment. Here in the UK and overseas, I'd had very much a business career. I wasn't HR, I wasn't L&D, learning development. I wasn't any of those types of roles that you'd normally associate wellbeing and mental health with. And I'd always suffered with panic attacks, and they started very early on. I think I was always quite an anxious child in some respects. But I started having these panic attacks at work, probably when I was about 19, 20, I remember, and just thought everyone had them. I mean, as we know now, back then people never spoke about it. And I just thought there was something wrong with me. And maybe I was, getting myself in a bit of a state, or I was too weak or not confident enough, which kind of went across against, all how I am as a person, because I'm quite extrovert, as you know, and very chatty and, very capable in that sense. But so it was just really confusing to have those kind of feelings. And I kind of had this career and went through a life experience. I went through a divorce. Many people go through big life changes, not always for the better, and just didn't handle it particularly well. And threw myself into a coping mechanism, which people think is really helpful, which is exercise. But actually what that did do was really numb out talking about anything, feelings, and just made me very, very physically unwell. I coupled with some disordered eating practices, and really looking at it now and knowing what I know, it was all about control. My life was falling apart. You can control that, and just didn't really cope, and had a huge really traumatic panic attack at work. At this point, I was working for a consultancy. I was a director on the board. Threw myself into work, which was great for a short period of time because I was smashing goals and everything. Performance was through the roof, but as we know, and as now what I teach in corporates, that's not sustainable either. What comes up does come down, and just fell apart one day and ended up having months off, diagnosed with several anxiety disorders, panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. Really, that was the big light bulb moment for me, and this was back in 2015. And I was so confused why we weren't talking about this at work. And back then it wasn't a sexy thing to talk about mental health and well-being at work. Wellness was very much the topic, how you exercise or eat healthily, not really mental health and understanding what that was. So yeah, it just made me think, right, I want to do something about this. And off I went and left the corporate world and started my own. It wasn't really even starting my own business. And I thought of myself as a freelancer, as a trainer for hire, if you like. There was always a theme of people in everything that I did in the corporate world. So even when I worked in banking, I was a project manager, but I used to work on HR projects or learning and development projects, or working with the recruitment team looking at, say, onboarding processes. So there was always that theme of people in everything I ever did, but not explicitly from that practice of mental health and well-being. So yeah, and that's kind of where I've ended up now, and did my MSc at the University of East London in 2018 and graduated in 2020 because I just felt I needed that theoretical academic underpinning, because I think that's so important when you work in the space, that you do have that expert knowledge behind you, as well as lived experience, which is really important as well, because it gives you that degree of empathy. But yeah, so it's been a bit of a journey, really. And then being in your own business, as you know, is as that grows and new problems and challenges present themselves, as well as good times. So yeah.
And I think that is really important, actually, what you said there, that you've got the education and the experience personally as well. And that's something for me that I've always said in the wedding industry, actually, that you need to have the experience in the role that you're doing, but you also need some education back in, whether that is education from learning from somebody else that's already in the industry, or whether it's more formal education. I'm totally a big believer in education. But what I love about the situation you're in is that, like you say, you can really put yourself in somebody else's shoes and say, I've been there, I understand, and you mean it, rather than sometimes when we go to counsellors or things like that, where they've only done college courses and things, and they haven't had to deal with some of the things that are being brought to them. And they, it's like, for me, it's similar to addictions. So I can't wrap my head around how somebody can be addicted to nicotine, because I've never been addicted to nicotine. So I'm just like, I can't, why don't you just stop? I just can't wrap my head around it. And I'm a very empathic person, but I just still can't quite put myself in their shoes, and it frustrates me. And I'm just like, just stop doing it. It's bad for you. It can cause it, there's all of this science that says it's so bad for you. Why can't you just stop? And then something can happen. I was listening to a podcast last night, and a guy was telling his life story, and he spoke about his mum, who was diagnosed with lung cancer, and she instantly stopped smoking. And so from being 2 packs a day for 40 years and not giving up and never thinking about it, maybe she tried it and failed a couple of times, who knows, don't know the ins and outs of it, but something that drastic stopped her dead in her tracks, and she just stopped. And I'm just like, so if you can do that, why can't you just do it any other time? I struggle with it, I really do. So I think when it comes to mental health especially, and I have told everybody on the podcast before that I have been I've suffered with depression since I was 16, on and off, and anxiety came and got me around 8 years ago. And that's been something that I've struggled with as well. So I am very well versed in this particular area. I think it's so important that people that you talk to about it have that ingrained understanding of where you're coming from.
And I think that's so important when you're working with clients and, you know, people that are listening to this podcast now. You know, if working in a wedding industry where you have lots of different stakeholders and clients, you want to make sure that you are also really truthful, and also you see things, I won't say not through rose-tinted glasses. Obviously weddings are beautiful and lovely, but there's a lot of, when it comes to event planning, there's obviously a lot of realism around, you know, what can and can't happen, and things that have got to be put into place. And when we work with corporates, all of my team, one of the characteristics is you have to have come from a corporate background originally at some point. So no one is, for example, they may have moved into more of a clinician, or they've gone down the route of coach or learning and development as a trainer or facilitator or mental health first aid instructor, but they've all had that background. You know, I've got somebody who works for me who was a police officer, a policeman in the Met. So everyone's got that background, because you can't sit in front of a corporate and sit in front of delegates and say, well, if you know, if you need to log off at 5, and you've got to make sure you log off at 5 o'clock, but then the client's emailing with an emergency that's got to be done, that, you know, if you're talking in a law firm, they're not, you've got to be real.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of culture stuff there. There's a lot of system, you know, that's why it's much bigger than training and workshops, because a lot of this stuff is about how organizations run, but you've got to be real. Otherwise, people just won't buy into it. And you know, it's also about what you're promising. And, you know, I can say to an organization, well, great, we can run you an hour webinar or a 90-minute webinar, but that's not going to change all your internal problems, you know, or the challenges you're currently facing for an hour. So it's that realist approach as well, I think, is really important. And as a business person, I think what you're committing to and what your values are, and standing by those. You know, I've turned business down because people have said, we want all of these, you know, mental health first aiders. And I'm like, great, you know, that's wonderful. What else do you have? What else are you doing currently? And nothing. Okay, well, you can't have all these people who are trained running around trying to support and help others when there's not, the infrastructure's not right, or you haven't got that background or support, or the leadership aren't bought into this, because they'll wonder why you're doing stuff at lunch times, or, you know, like running these types. It's just got to be so much more joined up. And I think, I think of a wedding, I suppose there's so many moving parts in that, there's so many different players, that it's quite complicated. You've got to think of that bigger picture as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to pull on something you said in your introduction there, was that you had this major life-changing situation that affected your mental health, because the last 2 years, I think everybody and his dog has had a life-changing experience, and we are now in what we would call our new normal, and that new normal isn't what the old normal used to be. You know, so even for somebody who works at home like me, and I'll use myself as an example. I mean, I wasn't working from home at the beginning of the pandemic, but I have worked from home before. So if you've worked from home in your business, and then all of a sudden your family members landed in your lap in March 2020, and you weren't allowed to leave your homes, and we've now come out the other side of it pretty much, and some people have still got their family in there. Like me. So it's different, and it's something that we have to navigate. And we're now suddenly like, where we've had 2 years of turmoil, so it didn't affect us so much having them round, because nothing was normal. And now it's like, well, now I've got to do my work, and I've got to record my podcast, and I've got to do this, and I've got to go here, and I'm working from home as I was pre-pandemic. Then you've got your partner going, oh, are we doing lunch together today? And like during the pandemic, that was fine. But hey, now I'm running my business again, and I need to be doing stuff. So there's like I say, a new normal that has come. And we're still suffering the effects of the pandemic. You know, there is so many people who lost people during the pandemic, whether that be external family members or people that did live with them. And they're now having to sort of be thrown back into the normal when things aren't as they were. And I think there is a lot of wishing that we could go back to sort of December 2019 and just like relive that, you know, blissfully unaware normality. And I think it will affect a lot of people's mental health. And now that we are back working and the wedding industry is back up and we're about to go for our first full season since the pandemic hit, we're kind of pushing all of that to the back of our heads because we need to be focused on work. So I wondered if you could kind of give us an idea of how we might navigate this new normal and look after our mental health while still running our businesses.
It's such a tricky one because our brains love routine. So, you know, if you, like you said, like as soon as everything happened in 2020, we adjusted. And then for a good year or so, that was then the normal, right? We adjusted to that. We got used to that little. So that became a new routine. I think what's so disruptive now is because we're not all how we were pre-pandemic, which was we'd go out and about and do whatever. For work and be out in offices and, you know, be in the place of work, whatever that is. And we're not working solely from home. And there's this, obviously, this talk about, you know, hybrid working or, you know, a mix up really. And I think what I find when I'm talking to people is they really struggle with, sometimes there's so much choice. It's like, well, I could work from home today, or I could go to an event space or a co-work space and work from there. I could go into my office. Like there's actually a lot of choice in some ways, or there's no routine. So before you get up, get out the door, done, come home, and it's like, oh, well, I could be working from home, or I could be, you know, all over the place. So I think it's trying to, first of all, let go of what you can't control. So, you know, if your diary does look that it gets a bit haphazard, or, you know, you're going to have upcoming periods of where it could be a lack of routine in terms of work, and especially for, as you said, for those people who are approaching the season and it's upcoming, and it could be, you know, long days out or in and out, like just not a consistent, you know, every single day is the same, is to think about, first of all, self-care. So if you're somebody who really loves to, you know, exercise is important for you. So if you're somebody who really loves to go for a walk or a run, or the gym is important to you, whatever those things are, how, if you're out all day, what does that look like? Can you get up a little bit earlier, maybe just do 5 minutes of stretching? So in your mind, you feel like you've done something. Okay, it may not be that half an hour walk, you've done something. You know, I think there's a way around just adjusting things slightly so that on the days when things are going to be very hectic, we've got whatever our self-care boosts are, we're practicing them. There's a big part about behavioral activation, as it's called. So when we have been out and about a lot, so if, you know, if someone is at a wedding all day, or they're running around seeing clients all day, you get home, you sit down on the couch and you think, oh, you know, the brain goes, I really want comfort. I think watching 3 or 4 episodes of Last Kingdom on Netflix. Other shows are available.
With a tub of Ben and Jerry's.
Yes. Yes, that would be preferable. That could, you know, is that something I need to do right now? Or again, am I better off? It's going to be a pain, but I'll get up, walk the dog for half an hour, 20 minutes around the block, come back and actually might feel a bit better, and still watch an episode, but I feel like I've done something. Or sometimes the Netflix is the most important because we need that bit of low level, numbing the brain. I don't want to really think about it. I just need to decompress. All of these things are good in moderation, right? There's nothing wrong with that. The same way as I've said in my intro, you know, if you're then out for 3 hours exercising, that's also a bit of a problem. So, or potentially a problem, depending on why you're training that hard. So it's just thinking about, actually, when you've had a long day, how do you make it easy for yourself? Do you leave your gym stuff off, or leave the dog so you do walk it at night? So there's a reason why you have to go and do those things, just to make a commitment to meet a friend at the end of the street and go for a walk, or drive over and go for a swim together, whatever that thing is that will again boost those happy hormones. So there's a big part about finding those small nudges, letting go what's out of your control and knowing, well, my day or my week's going to look like this, so I'm just going to have to accept it and plan around that a little bit. Knowing when you've got to push yourself, because the brain loves to be safe and secure and not have to stress and not be out of its comfort zone, and that's why the couch is so inviting. And then there's also a part of it about just having a bit more self-compassion and kindness. And when things are out of your control, or you do mess up, or you do have an argument with your other half because they have invaded your space, or you haven't got time, they plan to have lunch with you and then they've gone in a meeting or whatever it might be, it's just remembering just to take a bit of that pause and a bit of that breath and just have a moment, because I think we're quite quick to beat ourselves up. And as we know, this morning I missed my train on the way in for various reasons, and just did sit for a minute after I had a little mini cry, which I think was something I needed to do. I think that's been building actually for the last week and a half. And then I was about to start to kick in that inner critic of, oh, you're such an idiot, and why weren't you not hit the train station early, and you've been doing this work and all those kind of thoughts. And I just thought, Ruth, it's not the worst thing. You'll get to London, it's fine. Get your laptop out, do what you can do now. And the train came half an hour later on it, fine. So I think sometimes we're just too hard on ourselves as well. And we can all wish for things how they were before. I mean, this isn't relation obviously to someone who's gone through losing somebody, of course, but in terms of the life that we had, things have changed, and unfortunately things aren't going to go back in the box. So this is how we are. And I think but still being kind to ourselves, because I think people are still carrying a lot of anxiety, a lot of grief for health. Grief doesn't always have to be losing someone as well. I mean, grief can be the loss of what we've had and that experience. There's a lot that we've all been through, and I think that's what you said at the start was really important, that it doesn't matter whether someone's had a mental health condition before or not. We've all been through on some level it was called a collective trauma, because everyone was in that same boat, and we've all rode that boat slightly different with what's happened. And we can look at everybody else's lives and think, well, you might have had it better than me, or I definitely didn't have it as bad as you, but we can never understand what someone's truly been through. And I think that's something we've always got to be mindful of. And I think we're still going to feel the hangover of this for some time. I think it's impacted us in a way yet we just really can't even fathom. And I think work, which is such a big part of our lives, workplaces are really understanding how this kind of is going to be impacted going forwards.
I think that, and what you said there was so true, and something that I want to sort of touch on there is that acceptance of how you're feeling is okay. Because I think a lot of times when people, especially when it comes to mental health, because what we have to remember with your mental health, it's not rational. I get anxious about being in the supermarket, when there's a crowd, and I'm just like, but there's no reason for it. I haven't got any trauma related to that. It's just a situation that makes me anxious. And that's, something I have to accept and then learn to deal with. But a lot of the times, I think what we find is that people will totally start criticizing themselves. So not only are we feeling bad, like I'm using myself as an example, oh my God, I can't go in that supermarket, there's too many people there. But on top of that, I then go, but you're being ridiculous. Everybody else can manage to walk around a supermarket. What's wrong with you? Do you know what I mean? And then other people will say, like, taking it from other things, I'm feeling really sad and low, and I'm struggling to get out of bed in the morning. And then somebody goes, oh gosh, people have got it so much worse than you, love. Which just invalidates how you're feeling. And it doesn't matter. It does not matter what anybody else has gone through. This is about how you process what you've been through, and that is valid. So, you know, I remember when I was little, you know, being upset about something, or, you know, moaning because I couldn't have another biscuit or whatever it was, and my mum going, gosh, there's starving children in India, Donna, you know, there's starving children in Africa, you know, there's all of this kind of stuff. And I would just be like, oh, so invalidating your feelings, and you grow up with it, it then becomes this bigger thing. And when it comes to our mental health, it's a real bad situation for us to be in. So, you know, that acceptance, that self-care is so, so important and so valid. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think a lot of us beat ourselves up a lot.
We wouldn't talk to a friend that way. You know, I always say self-compassion is about treating ourselves with that kindness, and you wouldn't turn around to a friend, I'm sure, or, you know, your daughter or someone in your family and say, oh, you know, there's hardly anyone in that supermarket, don't be silly, get it. You know, you wouldn't have that conversation with somebody. And
No.
we forget that. We forget how we talk to ourselves, and we look at people who've sadly taken their lives. We hear more about people in the public eye that do that, and you think, again, on the outside they have everything. They have a beautiful life, they have a successful career, they have fame, they have money, you know, Kate Spade and people. Yeah, you just think, actually no one can understand. And I think it's so important to remember that, yes, you might think there's always people worse off, but actually your feelings are your truth, and that doesn't mean that they're any less valid, or however you're feeling is, you know, it's your frame of reference, it's your perception of reality. So yeah,
totally. Okay, Ruth, so all of that is kind of a little bit of a downer. It's a bit of a looking at the negatives of what the last couple of years have done to us, but we really have to sort of turn the other cheek, and look at the ways that we can make positives and turn things around, so we're not focusing so heavily on the negative. I think a lot of the times when we are depressed, when we're anxious, our go-to is to look at the negatives and sort of dwell on them a little bit. I know I dwell on them far too much. So if we are looking at changing our perception of our situation, looking at trying to be more positive, I thought we should look at what is positive psychology in the first place, and then we'll look at it in regard to our business. So a lot of people won't have heard that. It's like psychology, isn't it? What do you mean positive psychology? Can you explain a little bit about what positive psychology is?
Yeah, so positive psychology came about a couple of decades ago now, when the grandfather, if you like, of positive psychology, Dr. Marty Seligman, who was the president of the American Psychological Association at the time, was talking to colleagues about the fact that with psychology, we've always looked at it from a pathology, that there's something always wrong with people, that we always need to fix people, that it's always about mental ill health. And when I actually even started in this space 7 years ago, when I used to deliver mental health first aid training, if you ask people what the term mental health meant to them then, it was very much, they'd say anxiety, depression, you know, suicide, feeling unwell. Now, if I ask that question, I get a much more holistic response. You know, it's about balancing emotions. It's about how you feel. It's about how you cope. It's about how forward thinking you are. And so very much that was his ethos around looking at how we can make people flourish and thrive, and looking at happiness and what brings us joy. And in the early stages, I think it did have a mixed response in the field, because it was seen very much as a happyology. And the phrase that you might have heard being bandied around a lot in the last 18 months or 2 years is the phrase toxic positivity, whereby people are struggling, people are languishing, struggling, and it's very much, well, if you do all these wonderful self-care practices, you're going to feel great, and positive vibes and positive intentions. And yes, they are important, but really what positive psychology has gone on to do, and in the academic field, we talk about the second wave of positive psychology, which is very much focusing on trauma. I mentioned at the start, I talked about post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is an area of research, for example, that I've been really fascinated about, which sounds a bit weird, trauma coming from that field of positive psychology. And for me, what's really, I think, and what people have really got to appreciate about positive psychology now is that it's focused on all the emotions about how we feel, experience trauma with the pandemic, collective trauma, bereavements, adversity, tough times in business, whatever we're going through in life, divorces, relationship breakups, kids struggling, all of those things, and how we can take those experiences and not be grateful that they've happened to us or be pleased that they've happened to us or they don't bring us joy, but we learn from those. We've talked quite a bit already about how we've all taken new pathways. We've found ways to be more resilient in lots of ways. We've had to sit with very tough, difficult, lonely, hard times, and that's been a struggle. And hopefully lots of us will have taken something from that, and again, not grateful for the last 2 years, but maybe it's changed things for us that our lives wouldn't have changed otherwise, or we wouldn't have changed as a person. And I think that's, for me, is where it focuses very much on how we need to have those positive relationships. We need to look at our accomplishments. We need to invest in our self-care and our well-being. But actually, there's bigger questions like our meaning and purpose, and what do we want from life? I think those are kind of some of the big existential questions. But actually, we're all human, and we all have elements of that within us. So for me, I think that's what fascinated me about positive. My MSc is applied positive psychology. The title applied, meaning how can all of us, in some small way, adopt practices. We don't have to always pay for a therapist or pay for a coach. There's little things we can all do to help support ourselves.
Which leads us nicely on to my final question for you, Ruth, which is, how can we kind of bring positive psychology into our business? So if you can perhaps give us a couple of things that we can do in our businesses just to bring in some of that positive psychology.
One of the ones I'm talking a lot at the moment about this week, particularly for Mental Health Awareness Week, is flow. So how can we get into flow state? Because flow is known, getting into flow is known to reduce languishing, which is how we've all pretty much been going through a feeling of that the last couple of years. So, and flow is brilliant as a business owner, because we've all got elements, hopefully, as a business owner that we love doing. I know for me, it's running a talk or designing a content or writing an article. It's not doing my expenses. It's not sorting out my diary and answering emails. It's not those tasks which don't fill me with, I procrastinate on, I move around them, and I don't love them. But we've all got elements of our job, hopefully, especially as a business owner, because that's why we've gone into this space, that bring us that flow. It's where we challenge ourselves. Sometimes it's massively out of our comfort zone. We grow. We share that experience with somebody else. Usually, they take joy from that as well. And actually, that's when time. I'm sure you have moments where you go, "Wow, that hour passed and didn't even know," because I was just in the zone, right? So. But flow is really hard, because we have to be able to carve out that uninterrupted time. And maybe for some people that are listening who are in the industry, you might find you're in flow at the wedding itself, but there might be elements maybe afterwards, if you're a photographer, where you're editing photos, and maybe for you that is something that you really enjoy doing, and that's a couple of hours you could be spent looking at a video. Or if you're a videographer, or you're a cake maker, creating the cake that brings you into that flow state. So whatever those elements are, is how do you carve out that uninterrupted time and boundary that time as well. I heard a stat today that we check our email 74 times on average a day, and we pretty much only
Not guilty.
we pretty pretty much stay 10 minutes to a task at a time.
Mm.
So it's really about, you know, this fallacy of multitasking. So I think this flow is a brilliant one, and by a psychologist called Chick Sent Me High, because Chick Sent Me High, and great one for for business owners to look at. Second one, I would think, is practicing gratitude in just a small way. And I think we've all been through, as a business owner myself, we've all been through times the last couple of years where we're not sure of what it's, especially with this particular industry where weddings haven't happened. And what do I do as a business? Maybe some of your listeners have pivoted a business. So how do we practice gratitude? How do we look at the end of the day or the end of the week, what we're really grateful for this week in our business? What things are we really proud that we've achieved? What things are we actually glad we got off our to-do list? They don't have to be big. They don't have to be say, I got a new client that's worth 10 grand or 50 grand, or it could, and they're great, but it could be, I finally cleared that pain in the arse activity. I had a really lovely email from a client and that brightened my day. Or I got my tax return in early. They could be things we're still grateful for. I'm really proud that my partner supported me and let me finish what I needed to get done this week. So those two things. And my last one is mindfulness, because one is to be present in what we're doing. I think we can be so focused as business owners on the next task and what's coming up next, and just being grateful and being present where we're at. But also we can be, as business owners, constantly on and never switching off. So taking that time to be present with family, not being on our phones, being present at the dinner table or whenever that time is, or taking a break, I had to tell someone in my team this week, take a lunch break, take that lunch break. You need to step away from the desk for an hour. So they're probably my top three that I love
that.
And I
love what you said about dinner as well, because we have a rule in my house. So we moved into a house when my daughter was just turning 5, I think. Yeah, just before she turned 5, we moved into our first sort of home that was our home up until 2019. And we had a small table in the dining room, but she would eat her dinner up there. Sometimes I'd eat with her. Most of the time the table was covered in rubbish. I had a desk. Then I got rid of the table and I had my desk. That was kind of my office space. And so we would eat in the living room on our laps watching TV. When we moved into this house, we've got a dedicated dining room. We've got an office. So I was like, right, we are eating dinner at the table every night, much to her disgust, because she's 21 in 2 weeks time. So she was just like, oh, for God's sake, Mum, and no phones at the table. So that is my rule. So she's not here every night for dinner now because she got boyfriend. But when he's here, and when he is here, no phones at the table, we eat together as a family. And that to me is so important, that we just have that time, because my daughter comes from a generation that I think is suffering majorly with their mental health. And so any moments that I can take that are just like step away from the phone, let's have a conversation as a family, let's just have some family time, I think is really important for her, even if she doesn't realize it. But it's just so hard to navigate as a parent, watching your child go through this and not feeling, because as the parent, anything I say is like, oh, go away, Mum, what do you know, kind of thing. And it's like, it's so hard. So anything we can do to kind of bring that family unit together and let them know that they are safe and that they are loved is a good thing in my book. So it was all such a good podcast topic of conversation, Ruth. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me about this subject. Let everybody know about your 1 hour MOT, because I was just like, I need an MOT for sure.
So the 1 hour MOT is an opportunity to book a 1 hour session with myself, to basically have a bit of a coaching session, but we can bring in positive psychology tools. I can give you some support and guidance, whatever you need. So whether that is work focused, whether that's life focused, it's an opportunity to spend an hour with me, non-judgmental, listening space. I can hold that space for whatever you need, and we can run through a series of different aspects in terms of what your focus is. And if you've got some goals that you're looking to achieve, we can kickstart those. Same way with your car. We'll do a run through, and then I'll give you some guidance about how to take that forwards. And yeah, it's just an opportunity to have that check-in.
Fantastic. So all of Ruth's information will be linked in the description box below and in the podcast show notes. So please do head over, follow her on social, take a look at what she's doing. And if you're interested in that MOT, then definitely reach out to her. I think we all could do with an MOT every now and then. So I hope you found this week's episode valuable. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know next time we upload. And if you are listening on the podcast, then please make sure you are subscribed where you listen so you don't miss a thing. Until next week, bye for now.